Hello and welcome, friends, back here at SBT. Today we're having our Secular Buddhist Essentials class. My name is Venerable Tarpa. Before we begin, let's take a moment to appreciate our wonderful Sangha gathered here today. Quite a handsome group today, I might add. Today I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing the present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And as conscientious practitioners, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, and to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while always striving to improve it. Welcome again, everybody. Today's retreat day. The last Sunday of every month, we have an online retreat. We're having a blast. We've been meditating and praying and saying our affirmations, doing some teachings all day long. This is part of that. So that's been absolutely wonderful. And of course, we're in our Secular Buddhist Essentials program, and we are just finishing up part one, which is history, adaptation, and introduction to Buddhism. So with that said, we're learning a little bit about the various things of Buddhism. We dealt with the past history of it all, and now we're talking about modern traditions, and this is the last class for that. So we talked about the Mahayana, we talked about the Theravada a few weeks ago. Last week we talked about Tibetan Buddhism, and today we're going to be talking about Eastern Buddhism or East Asian Buddhism. And so the Buddhism of East Asia is a beautiful but very complex assortment of various schools that represent the majority of Mahayana Buddhism in the world. So I'm not going to go through all of it because every country has its own schools, and even a simple tradition like Zen has many smaller traditions and schools. So what we're going to do is just kind of give you a bit of a highlight over them all. I think I'll start with the idea that although there's different names for the different types of East Asian Buddhism, it's kind of funny that they're basically the same, roughly the same Buddhist presentation, and often it's said that the only difference is in pronunciation. So Buddhism first goes east and settles in China, where it's called Chan Buddhism. And then when it gets into Japan, it's called Zen Buddhism. In Korea, it's called Song Buddhism. But basically, it's very similar to the same practice and approach. So let's start with Chan Buddhism. So, of course, it's a branch of the Mahayana vehicle. Although first arriving in the first century, Chan Buddhism, founded by the great Buddhist master Bodhidharma, didn't become a formal tradition until the 6th century CE. Often considered to be a combination of Indian Mahayana Buddhism and Chinese Taoism. Chan Buddhism is accepted as an authentic and unique tradition of the Mahayana Buddhism. Chan is an experiential tradition, emphasizing the cultivation of direct insight into one's true nature, with the expression of that insight pervading all aspects of one's life. Chan practices include study, meditation, mindfulness, veneration, visualization, and sutra and mantra recitations. Traditionally, Chan Buddhism is predominantly found in China, Korea, and Vietnam. Today, it thrives in many countries around the world and in Western countries as well. I'm wondering if I want to kind of just share the textbook account of each one and then talk about them in combination instead of going on. Does anybody have any questions about Chan Buddhism? Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you. So again, Chan Buddhism is mostly in China, Korea, Vietnam, but Zen Buddhism, and both Chen and Zen, the translation is literally meditation or meditative state. Zen is mainly from Japan, a branch of the Mahayana vehicle founded in 600 CE in Japan. Zen is a later development of Chinese Chan Buddhism. Some assert again that the only difference is the pronunciation of the two. However, although having much in common, Zen does differ in subtle ways, mostly notably the emphasis on scriptures, on monastic style, that's a big one, practice techniques, and culture, of course. Practices within Zen is mainly focused on zazen, literally meaning seated meditation. Other practices include study, mindfulness, veneration, visualization, sutra, and mantra recitation. Additionally, both Zen and Chan utilize the contemplative practice of koans. Koans are mind puzzles or riddles. By contemplating or meditating on koans, the practitioner cultivates a unique insight while hoping to provoke sudden enlightenment. Some popular koans are things like, what was the appearance of your face before your ancestors were born? What is that sound of one hand clapping? So as you can see, they're kind of puzzles, right? Another one is, does a dog have Buddha nature? Or the simplest is, while contemplating on an object, simply asking yourself, what is this? Zen often de-emphasizes mere knowledge of doctrine, favoring instead a more direct experiential understanding. And it's not overly concerned with thoughts about the afterlife or rebirth or the nature of existence. For Zen, the focus is on being here and now. It often said that Zen is more interested in sitting with the question than knowing the answer. Traditionally, Zen Buddhism is predominantly found in Japan, but today it thrives in many countries throughout the world. And a proverb that always kind of sums it up in Zen is, great questions, great awakening. Little questions, little awakening. No questions, no awakening. So the other predominant Mahayana school is Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land is one of the most popular Mahayana traditions in East Asia. The concepts of Pure Land Buddhism can be found within all schools of Mahayana Buddhism, including Tibetan Buddhism, Chan, Zen. The Pure Land school originated in India, but didn't become a substantial movement until the 5th century, when it quickly spread throughout China and later to Japan. Focused on the Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, Pure Land Buddhism believes that the attainment of enlightenment is no longer practical or even possible in our present degenerated age. Therefore, the goal of Pure Land Buddhism is not enlightenment within this lifetime, but instead to take rebirth in the Buddha realm, Sukhavati, the Western Buddha Pure Land of Amitabha. The term Pure Land is often mistaken as similar to a Brahmic heaven. However, although descriptions of these Pure Lands may resemble the idea of heaven, Pure Lands in Buddhism are not permanent destinations, but instead wondrous realms created by Buddhas where practitioners can directly receive teachings, allowing them to progress rapidly and unobstructed on their path to enlightenment. Practices of the Pure Land Buddhist tradition include study, mindfulness, meditation, veneration, visualization, and sutra recitation, while often incorporating many Zen and Chan Buddhist practices as well. However, it is its practice of accumulating mantra recitations of the Buddha Amitabha for which the Pure Land Buddhist tradition is most renowned. Pure Land Buddhism claims that the recitation of the Buddha Amitabha's name, Namu Amitabha Buddha, or his mantra, Om Amitabha Hri, will ensure one's rebirth in his Pure Land, while also aiding to overcome obstacles, purifying negative karma, and receiving blessings and protection in this current life. Pure Land practitioners work to accumulate millions of mantra recitations of the Buddha Amitabha's name within their lifetime. Traditionally, Pure Land is predominantly found in China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Today, it thrives in many countries throughout the world. And let's also talk about, I think this is, you might find this interesting. So, although there's many differences between Indian Mahayana tradition and East Asian Mahayana traditions, the most distinctive, besides the obvious cultural and ceremonial differences, is their philosophical views. While both the Indian and East Asian traditions are commonly a mixture of Mahayana Madhyamaka, which was the initial Mahayana philosophy founded by Nagarjuna, and the Mahayana Yogacara philosophy, which was a later development. East Asian traditions maintain a strong influence of the Yogacara, or mind-only school. Traditionally, the presentation often have a different flavor from the Indian Mahayana traditions, being more the Indian traditions being more academic. Currently, when we think about Indian Mahayana, the only real place it's been preserved is in Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, they seem to be a bit more academic, where East Asian traditions, especially in presentation, are more poetic, and I think more mystical. Other differences are their views on the attainment of enlightenment, namely between the Indian Mahayana view asserting that enlightenment is gained gradually through a lifetime of mental and meritorious development, and the Chan Zen view asserting that enlightenment can be attained suddenly without lengthy study or spiritual endeavor. Here, the term suddenly still implies many years of practice. And I think that's the presentation I got for you. So now that's the textbook presentation. Any questions before I babble on? Any questions about those?
Well,
And
I
then I
had a
want,
question
yeah,
about
please.
what's your view on the in Zen there's that a practice of like meditating on koan. Um, what's your view, what's your own personal view on that?
On Cohen's himself?
Yeah, it's a broad general question. It's just sort of a
Cool.
leaping off point for you.
Cool. Well, let's talk about Cohen's. So Cohen's are really kind of an interesting, um, and I think probably in the West there must be some philosophical, or I'm sorry, psychological points that could be made about it. But the idea is because they're mental puzzles, um, it forces the mind into a lateral step of thinking where it pulls you out of conventional logic and creates a very unusual mental state in which they claim enlightenment can be created. I started in Zen and then I moved, but the Coens drove me crazy. I remember what did he, I think I had, does a dog have Buddha nature? And I spent so much time thinking about it and meditating. And I got really frustrated. And I finally went to my teacher and I kind of demanded the answer, right? This was 30 years ago. And he says, okay, I'll tell you the answer. I say, tell me the answer. I want a different one. I don't like this one. And he says, okay, the answer to does a dog have Buddha nature is moo. He said, moo. And I said, what? And he said, the answer is moo. And I said, what's moo? Well, moo is a Japanese word that means it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, right? And I was just wondering how long he expected me to sit there until the Japanese word moo came to my mind. So that was about enough of Cohen's as that I needed. But I think it's a fascinating approach to working with the mind. I definitely see its benefits. And so, Zen is a very unique way of working with the mind. So I like a bit more of a straightforward presentation. I like the Indian Mahayana. I instead of sitting with all the questions, I think some preliminary education is really beneficial. It's kind of it's kind of interesting that Zen Chen Buddhism it claims to have the largest library or accumulated text of Mahayana Buddhism in the world, and yet they tend not to have a very academic approach. So the idea is Bodhidharma coming out from India and taking Buddhism to the East. He himself has a much different approach to Buddhism. He's in conflict with the academic approach of that time in India, and so Zen Chen Buddhism they're a bit of a pushback against how academic Buddhism had become and and they come back into experience. So many of you might have had this experience where when you're sitting with a Zen teacher, whatever you might ask them, the answer is always the same. Very nice. Go back to your cushion. Right? Just not a whole lot of thinking going on. But of course, Zen has different schools. Some are more academic, some are not. Some are very dry, and some would say even cold, and others are quite humorous and has some nice style to them. There's a beginning of a conversation. Oh, Randron, please. What would you like to know?
Venerable, what is the SBT perspective on the Pure Land realm, and is it possible so that that concept was influenced by Christian missionaries during the time? The idea of a savior. Thank you.
Yeah, doesn't it sound that way? Well, first of all, the idea of Pure Lands or Buddha realms, right? So the idea is when a Buddha becomes a Buddha and he no longer has a body mind, he is reborn. This is a Mahayana belief. He's reborn into a Buddha heaven, a Buddha realm, a pure land. And it's his. He creates it. It's part of Buddhahood. And this is his residence, and people can come and visit. And then he can emanate, or she can emanate themselves into other world systems if they want to. But you could imagine, just with that description, that it's a very mystical belief. So SBT kind of steers away from the more mystical aspects of it. Everyone here is free to believe that if they wish. Belief is a personal thing, but as a tradition, it wouldn't fit within our curriculum. We're we're trying to engage in a Buddhism that's a little more grounded, with our feet on the ground. What can we do to benefit our lives here and now and benefit the world? David, would you like to share?
Okay. I just to contribute something to the discussion of the koans.
Yeah.
I've done a bit of koans in my history, and the thing that was interesting about them is, of course, they don't have a sensible answer. As you've described, the sound of one hand clapping doesn't have a logical answer. But if you break through that, you get a revelation. It's an experience. I can't describe it in any other way. It feels a very profound experience. I'm not sure if it really is or not.
That's a wonderful explanation. Thank you. I think that's very true. Yeah. Miss Wama?
Yeah. Aren't the Pure Lands throughout the sutras?
Mahayana. They're not found in the Theravada. I don't think anywhere in the Pali Canon they talk about Pure Lands. I think it's I'm not quite sure about that, but I believe it's purely Mahayana. And Tibetan Buddhism talks about them too, but the Pure Land tradition is singularly focused on that. And the Buddha Amitabha.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Fascinating. Hey, cool. So, when I finished my education in India, in the monasteries, I thought a great way to cap off my education would be to take my begging bowl and do a pilgrimage to Asia and visit all the Buddhist countries and study the Buddhism in each one of those countries. I stayed in monasteries. That was about a year and a half I did. I started throughout the Himalayas, and then I worked my way all through Asia. So what was amazing was I got to stay in monasteries of all these different traditions. And then even in the different countries, the traditions are slightly different, right? So I got some really amazing firsthand experience, not just reading about it in books, but living with these folks and experiencing, practicing with them, meditating with them, going out on alms rounds with them through the villages. I had the real experience, and it was really quite fascinating. And so we talked about Theravada Buddhism already. So I started getting into the Mahayana schools in northern Vietnam. And so what's kind of weird, so I gave you the textbook presentation, but with Pure Land, traditionally, they're not interested in mindfulness. They're not interested in meditation. They're not really interested in practices we would know it. It's much more veneration. It's about, going to the temple, lighting incense, making donations, and of course, mantra recitation, which of course is practice. So they'll have a big event and see how many mantra recitations they can do in a certain amount of time, and just reciting millions and millions, everybody. But more and more of the Pure Land school will come over, and they came to some of the monasteries that I was staying in to get meditation instruction from Zen groups. And a lot of the Pure Land practitioners, in one case it was a whole bunch of Pure Land nuns who came to study meditation, and they were quite afraid of it They were told that 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 it's dangerous and these things. So they were really breaking protocol to come to the monastery and study it. They were very brave. So there's so much crossover in Asia. So you even had schools that are called. There's one called Pure Land Zen. There's another one called Zen Pure Land, and so they're a real mix of them all. Oh, Remdro, please, Remdro. You're muted.
Sorry, Venerable. Just a couple of questions. I think in India, when I read the literature, I see this concept of Shri or so and so achieved liberation, and there's like a specific date, December 4th, or achieved sainthood on this day. Does Buddhism or these various traditions have that similar concept that maybe a certain teacher achieved enlightenment on December 2nd,
I've never
1980?
seen it. And generally, there's a humility to it where, uh, an enlightened being would never admit they were enlightened unless it was the Buddha. They would always tame it down and say, well, I've had some realization. I've had a taste of the awakened state. Nobody comes out and says they're enlightened. They save that for the Buddha. But the Theravada do, some masters will claim that they're arhats. I've heard that before. But like in Tibetan Buddhism, never. Even the Dalai Lama, he'd say the opposite. He says, oh, I know so little. Yeah. So what's interesting is Buddhism's progression to migration to the East. And some of this information isn't me kind of dogging them, but this is what my Chan and Zen monk friends shared with me about it. So there seems to be a lot of influence of other things with Buddhism, especially Taoism, which is China's in early religion, and boy, there's just I don't know how to put this into words. There's a lot of strange changes for Buddhism, including things like having a Buddhist monk on the battlefield to pray that you win battles. Things you'd never think that monasticism would be a part of. Nevertheless, it's become this really unique blend of traditions, just like Tibetan Buddhism did as well, right? And then even the Theravada in different countries, they kind of blend with their ancestral religions. So there's a lot of questions about that. Now, some of the differences is Chan Buddhism. Those had to be some of the most beautiful, peaceful, sweetest monasteries and teachers I've ever met. When I think about running a monastery, I often think of the Chan. All the luxuries were there. It was comfortable, and the abbots were the most sweetest people you ever met, and it just seemed like that sweetness just pervaded all their students. And they had to be some of just the nicest monks I ever met through North Vietnam, through Taiwan, in China. Whereas Zen in Japan really takes on a new flavor. Now, we talk about these traditions being blends. Well, Japanese becomes a blend with its samurai and its more militarized aspects. And in a sense, Zen Buddhism becomes like a militarized Buddhism. They're not fighting with swords in the street, but their style is quite can be quite intense. I did some long retreats in Japan, some of them being monastic retreats that are for verifying monks as being fully ordained, giving them all their titles, and they were intense. At one point, they were just yelling at all these new monks. They didn't bother Westerners. There were a few of us, but just screaming at these people, and but just really intense practice. One of the few retreats that I didn't finish because I just felt like I saw enough. Some people really like that intense discipline, and it works for them. And some people it doesn't. It doesn't work for me. But we should all be grateful that there are all these different varieties of Buddhism that can appeal to all kinds of different personalities. Yeah? Any questions? Why I take a little water? I got a tickle in my throat. Rabdrung, please.
Have you come across Burmese Buddhism, Myanmar, and how does
Yeah.
that differ?
Yeah, I was in Burma for about a month and a half. Buddhism, they practice Theravada Buddhism. So the main Theravada countries are Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Myanmar. And they always have been from early on. So it's intense. And of course, nowadays, we've all heard on the news the things that are going on. But let's talk about Eastern Buddhism today. So, yeah, the Chen were just sweet as can be. Japan Buddhism is really taken a turn, and it's kind of sad. A lot of my monastic friends in Japan were dedicating themselves to trying to bring Buddhism back to an earlier tradition. Nowadays, there's a lot of corruption in it. There's a lot of money in it. You know, at one point, for various reasons, the government decided that monastics should marry. And so as monastics, that was strange, that monastics can marry. Monastics can just have sex. They can leave the monastery, go out and have relations and come back. They can't just do it at the monastery. They're also allowed to drink alcohol and accumulate wealth. And of course, these are traditionally known as for monastics. So I don't want to paint a bleak picture of Zen, but boy, they have their challenges. In so many ways, it's a beautiful tradition, but they are challenged. The friends that I have are just do a beautiful job in bringing it back. I stayed at a personal temple of my friend's home with his wife, and for about 10 days. Oh, it was heaven on earth, and he was one of the sweetest monks I ever met. So the good news is I think people are working really hard to kind of reestablish more traditional Buddhism there. David.
Yeah, so if they can have money, relationships, and all these things, what actually makes them monks?
Great question. And I think what it really comes down to is what makes a monk is renunciation. And in the simplest terms, to be a monastic is not to be a layperson, which means not dedicating your life to a job, a career, to accumulating wealth, to family, things like that. I think that's what really makes. So whether you drink or not, that it's up to the that's up to the tradition. Even having sex somehow. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism does it with tantric sex. Usually the monastics don't engage in it. But I think what really makes a monastic is renunciation, renouncing lay life. I'm not gonna to go through, be a slave to the social conditioning, to live my life like everybody else is. It's one who sees the folly in that and says to themselves, it's all just a game and I don't want to be a part of that. I want liberation. I want freedom from that. That's my 2 cents.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
Walmo, you had your hand up a little while ago. Did I get to you? Oh, Namdak?
Yeah, there is something I thought you might I was curious what your thoughts on there. And I've seen online this very historically dubious claim about um basically Chan and Zen being completely separate tradition from other Buddhism, and that like Buddhism was founded after the Buddha died, whereas Zen was founded when Buddha was still alive. And
Yeah.
I, I've seen some tantalizingly convincing arguments, but also it makes absolutely no sense to me historically speaking. And so I wonder, what have you heard of this? What's your thought on that?
I'm familiar with the presentation, and it reminds me of the Tibetan Burn religion, which traditionally wasn't Buddhism at all. They convert to Buddhism, and then they create texts that say that it's something like 14,000 years old, or that it existed before the Buddha existed. So, yeah, there's some of that in various traditions. I agree, it seems quite dubious. Uh, Tim?
So, is Chan still being practiced in China, or is it
It
in
is.
okay?
It didn't.
It's
It
not
didn't.
being
Yeah.
oppressed or anything.
Well, all the communist countries oppressed the religions in Vietnam and China. Um, Chen never seemed to really become fashionable in the West, though there are Chen Buddhisms monasteries all over, including in America. There's many. They're usually um, indigenous people or people from those countries, right? So if you go to a Chan monastery, it'd be primarily Chinese people there, where Zen and Tibetan Buddhism became really fashionable for Westerners. I don't know if fashionable is the right word, appealing. So yeah, but it's existent all over the world. It's a flourishing tradition, a very beautiful tradition, and more traditional, especially their monasticism. So I'm quite a fan. I think it's quite beautiful. Um, Namdak also asked about. Oh, let's talk a little bit about more about Pure Land. So, yeah, many people see Pure Land and they think to themselves, it seems like Catholicism or Western Christian Judeo kind of an idea where there's heaven and you pray to go to heaven, and you wouldn't be the first to mention that. It's run through my head quite a few times as well. It does. It was founded pretty early on, so there's similarities there, but there's also some pretty distinct differences. But I just don't like the idea of people positing a degenerated age that we live in. A lot of traditions and religions say that, and they've been saying it ever since the beginning. And I kind of think the opposite. I think human beings are awakening. It's not always a steady progress. We take two steps forward, one step back. But I do believe it's obvious that human nature, we are awakening as a species. So I think we're in a wonderful age. Yeah. Um, Yeah, when I was there, so the Pure Land Buddhism don't really have much monasticism. I did run across some nuns, but mostly they'll have priests, and again they have events and things like that. At events, they'll recite sutras, especially the Heart Sutra, but they won't lead meditations and things like that. So that's Pure Land Buddhism, quite different. And I think Pure Land Buddhism is still the largest Mahayana tradition in the world, and mainly because it's completely lay, or it's lay populated, right? So you could imagine with a simple approach like that, very easy for simple common people to practice. Well, another thing that I could point out about Chan and Zen Eastern style Buddhism is this Taoist influence. So, for me, I mainly see it in their aim of awakening. For them, and primarily in Taoism, The idea isn't to transcend suffering or problems. The aim is balance, to develop balance in nature, right? And so one practices, so the idea of even improving is kind of moving in the wrong direction. You don't want to improve, you don't want to fall behind. You move away from goodness. Everything's a balance between everything. And though there's a taste of this in the early sutras, clearly this isn't the Buddhist approach. The Buddhist approach, a traditional Buddhist approach from the Nikaya Sutras, is that we can transcend our afflictions, right? So in Buddhism, we're trying to transcend all of this and reach nirvana. So the Buddha is very clear about, he teaches what's to be cultivated and what's to be abandoned, right? He's not looking for neutrality. He's not looking for balance in nature. The Buddha's looking at transcending nature as we know it. So to me, that's a really big difference in the two. So there's a lot of philosophical differences between the two, and a lot that can't be traced back to the early Nikayas. So it's a fascinating practice and tradition. And again, I have friends that they say that's the only thing that would have ever worked to them, a rigid discipline. Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in? Yes, Rengdro, please share.
Would you, this question, Venerable, would you say that the SBT is influenced by the Zen school and the focus on the present?
No, I think we're probably least influenced by Zen. And because I write the material, most of SBT comes from my own tradition. So, I was trained in Tibetan Buddhism, but more and more SBT is based on the Nikayas, the early school of Buddhism, traditional, yeah. Clearly, people that enjoy Zen are welcome. There's beautiful material in Zen. But even Mahayana, we're kind of moving away from more and more. Just for the fact that being agnostic and being more evident-based and technique-based practitioners, those schools tend to be quite mystical, right? So the Mahayana schools in general are not very applicable to secular Buddhism. Now they're perfect for individuals who want to study and believe those things. We don't tell people what to believe, but as far as trying to share what we believe the Buddha actually taught, it's hard for us to delve into the Mahayana. I'm still trying to come to terms with it. Just the origin of the Mahayana scriptures to begin with, right? Written hundreds of years after the death of the Buddha, but claim that the Buddha wrote them himself. Yeah. Hey, that's all I got for you, folks. Why don't we wind things up? I hope that was interesting to everybody. So it's retreat day. We still got a couple of events coming up. In about an hour, we have our purification and vow ceremony. Our dear friend Tim's taking refuge today. And everybody's welcome to join us. It's a beautiful ceremony. And it's short. You'll like it. After that, we'll finish up the retreat with a loving kindness meditation and group Sangha chat. So with that said, let's end today's teaching with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks again, friends. Bye-bye.